Chapter 33. 9/11. I woke up a little earlier than usual that Tuesday, around 8 o'clock. I went downstairs, brushed my teeth, and put my contacts in. As I came upstairs, I looked out the window and saw a small group of people standing, staring, and pointing in the direction of the World Trade Center. It wasn't unusual to see people stop on Fulton Street to look up at the huge towers. This was more people than usual, though. The way they were staring was different. It made me curious. As I stepped out onto the balcony, I saw my never-present neighbor standing on his side of our shared balcony, too. He was on the phone. I looked up Fulton Street, towards the towers, and I tried to make out what they were all looking at. From where I stood, I couldn't see anything. I asked my neighbor what was going on. In a pause in the phone conversation, he told me that his girlfriend just called to tell him that a plane had hit one of the towers. Wow, I thought. What an accident. Some little twin-engine Cessna plane must have gone off course and smashed into the building. It wasn't that hard to believe, but it hadn't ever happened before. This would be a moment in history. I ran inside, threw on the clothes I'd worn the day before, and grabbed my camera. I scampered out to Fulton Street and stood where the people had been standing just a few minutes before. I looked up and I saw smoke coming from the North Tower. A lot of thick, dark smoke. Shit. A plane really did hit the tower. A big one. I started snapping pictures. After taking 3 or 4 shots of the building in flames with a deep plume of smoke pushing into the sky, I stopped for a minute to take it in with my own eyes. Just as I did that, the second tower shook loudly, exploding somewhere in the middle. It looked like a bomb exploded the building from the inside out. From where I stood, I could not see what we all know. Now was the second plane striking the tower. After the explosion rocked the ground and everyone on it, people started running. They all took off clamoring away from the World Trade Center toward the South Street seaport. They ran towards the Brooklyn Bridge. I took off running too, but in the opposite direction. I ran towards the towers, camera in hand, stopping every block or two to take another picture. I ran in the direction of the burning buildings. I stood there on the northeast corner of the site taking pictures. Standing there, I took pictures of the looks on people's faces. Shock everywhere. Some people were crying. Others were staring up in complete and total disbelief. I kept taking pictures. I sent text messages to friends on my BlackBerry. I wanted to know if any of my downtown pals were out watching it too. This seemed like an event that should be shared with someone else. It wasn't to be. While taking it all in, we started to see the jumpers. People who were throwing themselves from the top of the building. We watched their bodies fall completely. The amount of time it took for a person to fall was eternal seconds. It was enough time to watch, camera in hand, and capture one person's jump on film. I'll never forget the man in black pants and a light lime button-down shirt who I saw plunge to his death. In my collection of pictures from that day, only I know which one has the jumper. Nobody else would know. You had to be there to understand. You had to be there to recognize which picture was just a burning building, and which captured the sad end of someone's life. I heard reporters talking about the airplanes that had struck the towers. They said they were 747s. These were not tiny twin-engine planes. These were huge commercial airliners. The fact that this was a terrorist act was staring us in the face, but it was simply too unbelievable to comprehend. One reporter said that he heard that the second plane had snapped in half when it struck the South Tower. He was planning to go down there to see it. That became my new goal, too. First, I needed more film. The drugstores were mobbed with people buying disposable cameras. This wouldn't work for me. Instead, I ran back to a small local camera shop near my apartment. I grabbed 2 rolls of film and was back on my way. By the time I made it to the southeast corner, the NYPD had taken up position. They were keeping people back. Only once so far had I heard anyone even suggest that the towers might fall. A black female police officer on the northeast corner had started to usher us back from the site with a warning that the buildings could collapse. Since they hadn't fallen yet, we all assumed they wouldn't. What was she talking about? I walked south towards Liberty Plaza. The police were holding everyone back. I couldn't get through. People were standing there looking and gawking in amazement and horror at the huge, gaping, burning, and smoking hole on the south side of the South Tower. I took a few shots with my camera and then pushed on. Living and working downtown for almost 2 years, I knew the streets like the back of my hand. I pushed my way through some side streets, making my way west. My plan was to get pictures of the remaining half of the plane on the ground by the South Tower, and then to make my way farther west. If I could circulate around the towers, I could get pictures from all angles. That was my plan. First, I wanted to see the remaining half of the second 747. I had pushed past police lines. They were holding people back, but I was walking freely a block west of Broadway and just 2 blocks south of the South Tower. As I started my way north to get the money shot, I came across a screaming woman. She was waving her disposable camera. She looked at me and said, "If you go up there, you'll see bodies. And you'll see parts." Ugh, I thought to myself. I'd seen jumpers, and I'd seen the explosion, but otherwise I hadn't seen anyone really injured. I hadn't seen any blood. I hadn't really seen any bodies or any parts. I decided I didn't want to. Instead of pushing up more, I decided to go west instead. That decision probably saved my life. Just as I got over to the West Side Highway, I had time to take a picture or two before the South Tower began its quick and immediate crumble. I looked up and saw the building coming down at me, and I thought, "Take a picture." Immediately, some other smarter part of me jumped in and said, "No, run." That's exactly what I did. If I had gone up to see the snapped half of the plane, I would have been standing directly underneath the tower as it fell. Who's to say if I could have escaped that plunge? Instead, I was 2 blocks west and 2 blocks south. That was a safer distance. By the time I turned around and started to run, I knew what was coming. Besides trying to escape any actual debris, I knew the air was about to become unbreathable and thick. As I ran, I grabbed the white linen sweater from around my waist and covered my mouth with it. 2 women dressed in office attire were nearby, and they were screaming with fear and distress. I tossed the other end of my sweater their way and instructed them to breathe through it and to hold on. I started running south, but also west, grabbing hold of the black chain-link fence that ran the length of the West Side Highway's bike path. As I looked back over my shoulder, I saw the building barreling down on us. It was like one of those crazy movie scenes, like when Indiana Jones runs from the large boulder. Except this wasn't a boulder and this wasn't a movie. Somehow I managed to snap a quick over-the-shoulder picture while I ran. 2 seconds later, we were swamped with darkness. Dust and dirt everywhere. People were running, stampeding, crushing anyone who got in their way. For a second, I laughed to myself that I was going to die because I didn't know how to run. I always avoided running, and here, now, my life might depend on it, and I was stuck. Fortunately, breathing through the sweater worked perfectly. When the chain-link fence ended, I knew we were down in small, open Wagner Park, just north of Battery Park. The air was clearer there thanks to the Hudson River running alongside the esplanade there. A simple water fountain and pool was surrounded by a flock of people all spitting and vomiting everywhere. The normally clear water was brown and grungy. The people were dusty and grungy. Everything was covered in the remains of the World Trade Center's South Tower. I looked around and spotted 2 small bottles of water. I grabbed one and immediately rinsed my mouth out. I saw people having breathing attacks, and I pulled out my asthma inhaler and offered it around. I checked my BlackBerry and saw messages from my father and Jesse. Just as I was quickly typing my reply to my father to let him know I was okay and alive, the sky started to roar. The ear-piercing rips of low-flying airplanes shook the ground. It shook everyone on the ground even more. After just seeing 2 planes hit the World Trade Center towers, causing one of them to completely collapse, we were sure these planes were more attacks, now coming for us. People couldn't do anything but scream and cry with terror. That was the scariest moment of the whole day. After running from a falling 110-story building, it was the sound of more planes that scared us most. As they ripped and roared away and the screaming calmed down, a new message from my father came through. His message explained about the Pentagon being hit. Just as I was reading that news, so were a few others. Word spread fast. At 8 a.m., we were all going about a normal Tuesday. By 10 a.m., we were at war. The movies told us stuff like this could happen, but nobody believed our world could actually really go like that. Now everything was different. As the morning continued, I spent my time hiding from the subsequent North Tower's collapse, and then made my way back to my apartment. The police were ushering everyone out of downtown. Any boat that could fit one person was taking two. They were forcing us away. I knew that once I was off the island, I wouldn't be able to get back for days. My cats were downtown, in my apartment. I had to get back to them. When I came to the South Street seaport from along the East River, the sky started to spread open, and light started to come through again. I took a picture of the light trying to break back through. It was my first picture of the new skyline. No more towers. It was unimaginable, and it was real. At the seaport, people were being hosed off. They were offered water from the local restaurants. People were gathering together and using any telephones that might work to call their loved ones. It was quiet and dusty on the seaport. I sat there chewing gum, trying to extract the dust and grime from my mouth. I exchanged more text messages on my BlackBerry with my father and Jesse. In a quick reply, Jesse told me that his girlfriend, Juliet, was at his apartment, upstairs from mine. He asked me to go check on her. I made my way home, looking at how the streets had changed. Everything was covered in dust. The sun was shaded out by the residual haze. My home looked like a war zone. Upstairs, I found Juliet and did what I could to comfort her. She took a shower and sat there in total shock. I messaged Jesse and told him he needed to come home and check on her. Meanwhile, I went downstairs to my apartment to check on my cats and sit down. In my apartment, it was just like any other day. Except for me being covered in dust and grime, everything was clean and normal and working. I turned on the TV and the cable was working. It was the first time I saw what actually happened on TV. I watched amazed and in shock. It was going on TV, but it was also going on down the street. I could step out on my balcony and see what used to be the Borders bookstore burning in heaps of flames. I could also just sit in my living room staring at the TV and see the same thing. It was a strange merger of media and extreme reality. As I stared at the live TV coverage, I got onto the internet and started chatting with my friends there. We were all doing quick head counts to see who might still be missing. Amazingly, it turned out that nobody we knew was gone. As it turned out, I was probably the person closest to death that day. Even more unbelievable. I rang my grandmother in North Carolina to tell her what had happened. She was happy to know I was okay and astounded at what had happened. I also rang my other grandparents in New Jersey briefly, and they told me how they could see the smoke from there. When I finally spoke to my mother, she was crazed. It turns out my father had gone out to the country club pool in the middle of the morning. After I had first texted him to tell him I was just watching the buildings burn, he went out for a swim. He'd come home just in time to tell me about the Pentagon. She was furious with him. She had been working at her middle school nursing job and heard about what was happening. Knowing I lived so close by, she called home over and over again to find out if I was okay. My father's swim meant she got the answering machine, again and again. Innately a worrywart, today's events took her over the edge. Once she heard what I'd done that morning, taking pictures and running around, dodging falling towers, that did not help. I think she was more shaken than I was. For the rest of the day, my friends came by to watch TV and try to sort out what we should do. The buildings are burning. Should we go down and try to help? Should we leave? None of us wanted to. We looked over to the medical center on Gold Street, just across the street, and we saw the nurses and doctors idly milling about. That was one of the worst signs. In an emergency situation, you imagine doctors and nurses overrun with injured people. There were no injured people. There was nothing to do. We all came to realize either a person walked away from what happened or they died. There was no in-between. It made the already unbelievable even harder to take. Despite the seriousness of the day, my emotional attachment to Enzo still took hold. While running from the crumbling building, my only thoughts were foolishly of him. As I hid under the Staten Island ferry terminal, I kept thinking over and over again about Enzo. I wished I could call him. I wished I could leave the city with my cats and go stay with him. I wished I could at least talk to the person who had all of my thoughts before what could have been my death. When I returned to my home and signed onto the internet, the first message I got was from Enzo. He sent me 3 messages in total. The first one was, "Thank God you're alive." The second was, "You had me scared to death when you weren't online." I replied, "Yeah, I was out there, but I'm okay. Just shaken up." He then said, "Good. Take care." That was it. That was the last thing Enzo ever said to me. While I had been dodging death, I'd been thinking of him. While he watched the whole thing on TV, he'd been thinking of me. What should have changed something, what should have meant something, didn't. He was still unexplainably gone. In the next few days, I went through the motions of trying to sort out what had happened. I spent the first night uptown with my friend Deb, but me and my experience were too much for her. The next night, I went to stay with my friend Tammy. She kindly let me bring my cats up to stay with her in her apartment on the Upper West Side. When Jackie and I went down the day after to check on my cats, we heard that other buildings were still collapsing. Even though my apartment was a safe 4 blocks away, I was nervous. If anything fell across Broadway, it could start a domino effect on all the old buildings. Those side streets were narrow. The buildings were old and built very close together. I had to get my cats out. Extracting them was the hardest effort. I had cat carriers for them, but they hated them. They hated them even more when we had to walk them out of that downtown war zone. There was no official evacuation plan. No buses. No subways. Technically, my neighborhood had not been evacuated. Diagonal from my building was an old high-rise full of retired people. It would be impossible to get all those elderly people out. Thus, my area, only 4 blocks away from where the towers fell, was not officially evacuated. Getting in and out of there was both technically illegal as well as completely unsupported by any means of public transportation. Jackie and I had to walk 2 miles carrying my poor, crying, fat cats all the way up to Houston Street to catch the nearest train. As the days wore on, I was forced to think a lot about life and death. I was forced to think about the important things in life. I was forced to think a lot. All the while Enzo kept creeping in. I missed him before 9/11, and I still missed him after 9/11. The whole experience was completely overwhelming, and coupled with his recent dismissal of me, especially after my own die-hard embrace of us as real, it made everything unbearable. In the weeks and months that followed 9/11, I lived my life as a sort of drunken sleepwalker. Nothing was real. I couldn't comprehend what had happened. Even more, I didn't think there was anything to comprehend. I assessed myself as unaffected. Despite everything that happened, what seemed to hurt most for me was losing Enzo. Everything else I had lived through. I was in denial. I was checked out. Months later, I got a wake-up call. After the spring semester of grad school started, I got a bill from NYU for my tuition. I owed them almost $8,000. I figured there had to be a mix-up. I had student loans to cover my tuition. I rang the bursar's office and explained the situation to them. I told them my student loan check should cover the cost of my tuition. They told me they already sent me the money for my student loan. They told me they sent me a check for almost $8,000 back in the fall. I vehemently denied that. I told them that there's no way they sent me a check for $8,000. If they sent me a check for $8,000, I would certainly remember. $8,000 is a lot of money. I argued with them for a couple of weeks back and forth. They kept trying to track down the money. Finally, they sent me a copy of the returned check. At the same time, I checked my checking account history and saw the deposit. It had arrived at the end of September. I had deposited the $8,000 loan check. Even more, I had spent the check. All $8,000 of it. Not on anything important. Not on anything big. It was just spent. Gone. All of it. Looking back, I saw how I spent $8,000 in those first few months after 9/11. I spent it drinking every night with Jackie. I spent it on recovering from 9/11. I spent it ridiculously and foolishly. That is how 9/11 impacted me. I went on a binge. For months I traveled and spent and didn't think. I tried to escape and instead it just left me with an $8,000 unpaid tuition bill.